Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and I hope you're doing equally as well, or better, and I hope the weather's treating you kindly in your part of the world. And so, let's get started, shall we, with part 4 of our story. And if you haven't heard part 1, part 2 and part 3, click on the description because you don't want to miss out on this fabulous story. So let's start with part 4 of our story tonight, shall we? Claudia's account. I was more than a little astonished to discover my mother-in-law Elspeth had been murdered. It seemed so surreal. I felt as if I'd been thrown onto a movie set and was caught up in some crime drama, of which I was playing an intrinsic role, as one of the key suspects. It had never crossed my mind that anyone could ever murder Elspeth. In my opinion, murder was not something I thought would ever cross the threshold of my own life. But how wrong I was about that. It can happen to anyone. In truth, the only people that would stand to gain from Elspeth's death were her own children and a local charity. And let's not kid, Elspeth was an incredibly wealthy woman, who had never been lavish with giving handouts to her own kids. Believe me, Simone had ranted with me enough over the years about all this stuff about IVF treatment with her mother. She had confronted Elspeth, who had said to her, "Simone, I won't be giving you any money for IVF treatments. I don't want to support you bringing a child into this world when you're married to a serial cheat. I'm sorry, but I just can't do it. Get rid of the man, and I will reevaluate my decision." She had looked at her daughter earnestly and said, "You want a baby, Simone? Listen to yourself. It's ridiculous. Your marriage is a joke. Everybody knows what Oliver is doing behind your back. It's going to look incredibly ridiculous if you have a baby on top of all this." "I'm not worried," Simone had said. "I know Oliver will never ever leave me, Mum. He's committed to me and he'll be committed to the baby. He still loves me, you know. He just has a wandering eye, that's all. But it doesn't bother me." "It doesn't bother you, Simone? Do you have any self-respect, young lady? You're happy to let your husband frolic around like this behind your back. Too right he'll never leave you, Elspeth. The man has about as much ambition as an upside-down sloth, who's waiting for a big payday to sort out all his problems for him. He's hanging on to the hope of a big inheritance from me, so that he never has to lift a finger again. And with a wife like you, letting him play around at will, he must be as happy as a pig in clover. I mean, honestly." "But I love him, Mum," Simone had told her mother. "If I confront him about what he's done, he'll leave me, and it will be all over between us, and I can't let that happen." "If he leaves you, Simone, it'll be the very best thing that has ever happened to you. That man has treated you like a piece of trash, and I simply cannot believe you're willing to put up with it. I raised you better than that, my girl." I had told Simone that her mother was right, and that Oliver was indeed a prize jerk. But she refused to hear anything negative that me or her mother had to say about her husband Oliver. I'm not sure if she had abandonment issues or what her problem actually was. Maybe it was low self-esteem or something like that. But she professed to love the bones of her husband and seemed willing to overlook his indiscretions with other women, as if he was a dog that just couldn't help himself from lifting his leg up all over the furniture. That was when I realized that love can be very complicated indeed, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In the story of Shrek that my 2 children love and adore, Fiona is madly in love with a big ugly ogre, but I can understand and appreciate that love in every way, because Shrek was a lovable character, so much so that his physical imperfections were actually the making of him. But the hippopotamus-faced husband that Simone was in love with, dripping with the brazen infidelity of his licentious lifestyle, was far from attractive in my opinion. But Simone was seeing her husband very differently, from a lens that saw him in a more promising light, as if she was seeing him when he was at his freshman year in college, when he'd been a handsome-looking young man. And from that point on, She had decided he was the one. I knew the story well. She had told me about it often enough. Simone had married Oliver when she was 22 years old. They'd been together for 15 long years. And now at 37 years old, he was still promising her the world, that when he could afford it, they'd try for several rounds of IVF treatments for her to get pregnant. Simone clung on to that lost hope, like someone who's been thrown a life raft when they're out at sea, and waiting for a rescue that might never ever come. After I married Graham, Simone and I became closer than sisters, and usually there was nothing she would not keep from me. But after Elspeth's fortuitous death and our recent interrogation at the police station, Simone had become increasingly subdued and seemed to have severed all communication with me, which was so unlike her. It had been profoundly odd, but I persuaded myself she was grieving for Elspeth. Naturally, Elspeth's death had hit us all hard, and now that it had become a murder investigation, it was even harder to have to stomach. Graham confided in me that he had a hunch that Simone knew something about her mother's death. "Did you not see how she was behaving when she was at the police station?" he said to me in bed one night. "I've never seen my sister look so scared. And as for Oliver, well, he's behaved very insolently, hasn't he? As if he's got something to hide. You mark my words, Claudia. Simone knows something about my mother's death." "I'm sure that's not true," I insisted. "She told me that her mother confided in her, that life got too much for her." "That's my point," said Graham. "Why would she say such a thing to you? Especially now the police have established that her death was not a suicide. Have you noticed that Simone, who usually pops over to our house every day to see you and to see the kids, has been unusually quiet of late?" "Well, maybe she's just grievously upset about your mother's death. That's perfectly natural. She's probably locked herself away in her bedroom and is grieving. We all grieve in different ways, you know. Maybe Simone just needs her space." My husband sighed and said, "I hope you're right, Claudia, but I haven't got a good feeling about this whole wretched business, you know. And I am concerned that Oliver is behind my sister's insouciance. He controls her, and my guess is he's put a stop to her visits to our home. And the question is, why?" "Oh, don't be ridiculous," I said. "You're grasping at straws." One night something happened that turned my life upside down, because it opened a can of worms that I never saw coming, and the events of that night were profoundly bizarre. So much so that I'd be forced to ask myself years later, did that really happen? My husband and I had retired to bed. The house was steeped in a congenial silence. There was a pronounced nip in the air, as it was early autumn, and the countryside was richly ablaze with reds and golds that the month always invited. The household was still heavy with the loss of Elspeth hanging around our lives like a choker chain around our necks that was threatening to suck the life out of all of us. My family was grieving in different ways, and I knew my husband had taken his mother's death very, very badly. We all wanted answers as to what had happened to Elspeth, but I had an ominous clawing feeling in my gut that knowing the truth would be really unsettling. Naturally, we knew we were under investigation by the police. That was a given. But even with our somewhat loose alibis, they were sniffing around us like a hound after a fox's blood, and always randomly dropping over at the house to ask questions at the most inconvenient times, which I began to believe was by design. One of the detectives was constantly arriving at my house wearing a trench coat, even when the weather wasn't particularly cool. He would appear from nowhere, and then he would throw out all kinds of questions at me, like the darts being flung at a dartboard. He reminded me of that rather endearing 80s detective Columbo. He had this annoying ability to just arrive at the very moment when I was in a dreadful rush. "Oh, there you are, Mrs. Hancock. I'm so glad to bump into you again. I was just passing. I've got a few more questions I need to ask you," he'd say, studying me through his brown hawk-like eyes. "I was about to do a shop, detective." "Mrs. Hancock, I only need a moment of your time." "Well, you'd better come in, hadn't you, detective?" I would say, leading him into the kitchen. And on our most recent rendezvous, He'd asked me all about my sister-in-law Simone, and far from occupying only a mere minute of my time as he had promised, he left after 2 hours, having devoured an entire plateful of my children's brownies. These visits were becoming increasingly more regular. The detective knew that someone in our family was nursing a dark secret over my mother-in-law's death, and I think he thought that if he hammered away enough at the walls of our innocence, the cracks would begin to show, and his old-fashioned sleuthing techniques would be expeditiously fruitful.
"I understand, Mrs. Hancock, that you and your sister-in-law Simone are very close,"
he had said at his most recent visit. I recoiled when he mentioned Simone. I was naturally protective towards my close friend.
"Does your sister-in-law Simone talk to you about her life with her husband Oliver? Are you aware of the financial struggle she's been having of late? Mrs. Hancock, you informed one of the detectives at the station that your mother-in-law refused to help your sister-in-law and her husband out financially when it came to IVF treatments, because your sister-in-law was very eager to get pregnant. She knew her mother could transform their lives if she was more generous."
"Of course she was upset, Detective. Did I not go into detail with the detective I spoke to about all this at the station? Must we go over the same old ground again and again, as if we're reenacting Groundhog Day? I appreciate that you're doing your job, Detective, but these constant repetition of questions you've already asked me is doing my head in. As I told you, I'm sure she thought her mother was being unreasonable. She's been trying for a baby for the last 15 years with no joy. Her mother refused to support her. Simone was desperate to get pregnant, and Elspeth never paid for her to have any treatments, so of course it was distressing."
"And why is that, Mrs. Hancock?"
asked the detective, his brown eyes growing sharp as he took a sip of his coffee, along with a large bite of his brownie. He watched me like a vulture hovering over a meaty carcass.
"We have a saying back at the station, Mrs. Hancock, that greed and desperation can bring a good man down. I put it to you that with her mother out of the way, Simone would become a very wealthy woman indeed, and then she could have all the IVF treatments that she wanted."
"Look, Detective," I retorted, "I know how it looks, but I assure you Simone was used to Elspeth refusing her financial help. She ceased asking her mother for help a long time ago. Her mother had a hard approach towards finances. Simone accepted that about her mother. Unfortunately, her husband is a lazy bugger. He makes bad investments, is often being laid off, so they have had some financial difficulties from time to time. But they muddy along as you do, and these days I think they've got their finances sorted out."
"How do you know all this, Mrs. Hancock? If you don't mind my saying, you seem very well aware of your sister-in-law's financial state."
"Well, I'm close to Simone, aren't I? If she is having financial issues, I'd know all about them. She doesn't keep stuff like that from me. She's an open book. We don't keep stuff from each other, Detective."
The detective raised a cynical brow. "You have spoken at length, Mrs. Hancock, of your brother-in-law's infidelity, and how your sister-in-law Simone conveniently turns a blind eye to it. I put it to you, Mrs. Hancock, that your sister-in-law Simone is putty in her husband's hands, and that she would do anything for him. Let's just say she's very malleable."
"Where's this coming from, Detective? I don't know what you're trying to suggest, but if you are daring to say that my sister-in-law would harm Elspeth, you're joking. You're absolutely joking. She isn't capable of that."
"I thought you would say as much," said the detective,
sauntering off, leaving me feeling more than a little confounded. So on this unassuming, very ordinary night, as I'm lying in bed, a wind is whistling outside my bedroom window. The shutters are rattling. I feel cold, but I don't fancy getting out of bed to put on more clothes, so I cuddle up to the blankets tightly. My husband Graham is fast asleep. I can hear him snoring, and I feel envious of his ability to slip into the world of his dreams so seamlessly. I, on the other hand, struggle tirelessly to sleep when my mind is otherwise preoccupied with ominous thoughts. the silent whispers that keep nagging at my mind. I shut my eyelids as tightly as I can, willing myself to go to sleep, but I just can't. I can't get the detective's words out of my head.
It seems your sister-in-law will do anything for her husband.
The words leave me feeling very flustered and discomposed. I pondered over what he actually meant. Did he seriously think my sister-in-law Simone was connected to her own mother's death? Surely not. I sit up with a start in my bed and see my cell phone on the nightstand is flashing brightly in a green luminescence and is vibrating. I can see on the caller ID that it's Simone, my sister-in-law, who's calling me. Talk of the devil, I haven't spoken to her for ages. I'm thinking about her, and she suddenly rings. I glance at the time on my cell phone. You've got to be kidding me. She's phoning me at 4:45 in the morning. I instinctively sense that something is wrong. So I slip down the passageway so as not to disturb my husband, to talk to her. Simone, is everything all right? You're freaking me out calling me so early in the morning.
No, everything is not all right, she tells me. I'm sitting in my SUV, parked outside your house. I need to talk to you, Claudia. We have to chat. Please don't wake up Graham or any of the kids. I need to talk to you alone. We can park the car. You can drive my car away from the house. On that sequestered country road, we can park there. We need to talk.
Of course. I'm surprised. I'd never ever heard Simone's SUV driving down the driveway. I hadn't spoken to Simone for days, but I knew something was dreadfully wrong by the desperate tone in her voice. We had become very close over the years, so I knew when she was grievously upset about something, and at this God-forsaken hour of the morning, she was more than just upset. I hurriedly put on some leggings, a sweater and some sneakers, and I discreetly descended the staircase. I opened the front door very carefully, and it nearly banged shut on its hinges, as I was eagerly embraced by huge gasps of hungry wind that beat fiercely against my face. Thankfully, I stopped the door from doing much damage, and involuntarily waking up my entire household, which is the last thing Simone would want, as we did not need to alert everyone to our nocturnal activity that night. It was dark that night, but a pearly moon shone down upon me, subduing the darkness with its effusive light. There was a pronounced chill in the air, so I was ever so glad to be warmly dressed. I moved cautiously towards my sister-in-law's blue SUV, my sneakers grazing the moist trail of morning dew. I was greeted to the friendly sounds of the crickets and frogs. Sure enough, there was Simone, sitting in the front seat of her car, looking lost, forlorn and bedraggled. Her cheeks were puffy, her eyes pink, and her gaunt face looked all sunken and hollow, as if she had lost an extortionate amount of weight very rapidly. When she saw me, tears spilled down her cheeks, and she climbed out of her SUV, asking me to drive in her place, so I happily obliged.
I can't drive, I just can't. I'm in a terrible, terrible state.
You certainly are. I mean, Simone, I've never seen you like this before. What on earth has happened to you? You look absolutely dreadful. I haven't managed to speak to you for days. You've been very, very quiet, and you've been avoiding all my telephone calls. You haven't returned one of them. And the only time I've seen you is at the police station, and you were as white as a sheet. What the hell is going on? That detective has been sniffing around me, asking me a plethora of questions, all centred around you and your husband Oliver, of course. I don't want to talk about it now, said Simone. Please drive. Let's park somewhere very quiet further down the country road, not too far from your house, and I'll tell you everything. I don't want to talk here, in case we wake up your husband and kids. We won't go far, I promise. Where is Oliver? I asked her suddenly. Does he know you've come out here in the middle of the night to visit me? No, he doesn't, and I don't want him to know. He's in bed, fast asleep. Well, at least I hope he is. He drank beer tonight. I hope to God he does not wake up and find I'm not there, because if he does, he'll kill me, quite literally. She looked at me with wide, scared eyes. He told me he doesn't want me to talk to you ever again. He's insisting that I stop being your friend and sever all communication with you. But how can I do that, Claudia? But you know what he's like. He can be very dominating. Of course I know what he's like. Oliver could be very, very controlling. But why on earth would he want Simone to sever all communication with me? That did not make any sense at all. Unless he had something to hide, of course. Once I started up the engine, I discreetly drove away from our driveway. Then I took a long turn down the bumpy dirt road, only a stone's throw away from our house, fringed by thick forests on either side. And then I parked Simone's car on the side of the road, killing the engine. Now I need you to tell me everything, Simone. What is going on? I don't mean to be rude, but you look as if you've been run over by a bus. I've never seen you look like this before. What's all this nonsense about Oliver not wanting us to talk again? We're best friends, for goodness sake. Simone fiddled awkwardly with her string of Tiffany pearls and looked up at me through sad eyes. There's stuff you don't know about, that I haven't told you, Claudia. I didn't want you or Graham to worry, but me and Oliver, we've been having some financial problems for quite a while. I haven't shared that with you, but things have been really, really bad. Me and Oliver, we're in serious debt, Claudia, which of course the police are very interested in. We've received a repossession notice from the bank, and we were about to be turfed out of our property. We were getting final warnings in the post. Oliver said we had to go and visit my mother at her house and ask her for financial help. Otherwise we'd both be homeless. It really was that bad. I'm not exaggerating. I told him my mother would never bail us out. She never has, and she never will. You know exactly what she's like. She's got strong views about that kind of thing. Oliver literally barked at me and said,
"You listen to me, Simone. You will persuade your mother to change her mind about giving you money. Won't you, Simone? I'm relying on you not to let me down."
I told him I would try my very best, that of course I would, to talk to her. But I warned him over and over again that my mother is mulishly stubborn. He told me that I didn't try hard enough to talk her around, that I needed to toughen up a bit and stand my ground, and then she would listen. We both arrived at my mother's house on the day she died, and found her in the yard cutting some roses to make an arrangement of flowers. She has an incredible rose garden, as you well know, and in her hand she had a pretty posy of mauve, pink, white, cream, yellow and pink roses. They smelt so fragrant and beautiful. She was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and was in a very good mood that day. She gave me an effusive hug, and you know my mother, she doesn't give hugs easily. But she was genuinely thrilled to see me. Oliver not so much, but then again she's never liked him very much, and has made no secret about how she feels about him to me. As I was saying, it was a warm day, and she said it was such a pleasure to have an impromptu visit like this from us. I felt rather guilty about that, because I knew we had an agenda in visiting her. The police know we visited her house because we knew better than to lie about such things to them.
"It is so wonderful to see you, Simone. What a pleasure. Let's go inside, shall we? It's a beautiful day. And have some lemonade. I don't know about you, but I'm very thirsty. Doing all that gardening work takes it out of you, you know."
She invited us into her favourite little sitting room and brought in from the kitchen long glasses of ice-cold lemonade, along with thick wedges of cheesecake that was absolutely delicious. She sat down opposite us very attentively and asked us how things were going with us. We engaged in supercilious small talk. You know how you do. My heart was pounding violently in my chest as I waited for the opportune moment to ask my mother for financial help, and I was very nervous about it. Oliver was making faces at me, as if to say, "Speak to her now, for goodness sake." But I was waiting for the appropriate moment, and it never seemed to come. Oliver then became impatient with me, and got quite brusque, and he said,
"For goodness sake, Simone, cut all the crap, will you? Tell your mother why we really are here."
My mother looked from me to Oliver and said, "Oh dear, I thought this was a friendly visit from you. Is something up? You better tell me about it, had you not? That was when I said, Mum, we're in trouble. We desperately need your help. We'll pay you back, I promise, when we get back on our feet. But our house is going to be repossessed by the bank. We need money desperately. We can't fix our problems without your help. Otherwise we're going to lose our home. She was silent for a moment and looked from me to Oliver and said, So you're expecting me to bail you out? Is that what this is all about? You know I can't do that. If you're homeless, Simone, you can move in with me for as long as you like. I'll welcome the company, until you get back on your feet, of course. I'm very sorry, Oliver, but I can't extend the same invitation to you. You will need to make your own arrangements. I know how you've treated my daughter, Oliver, over the years with contempt, so I'm afraid I cannot offer you the same hospitality, and I will not. But as for bailing you both out financially to save you from losing your home to the bank, no, I can't do that, I'm afraid. The both of you need to learn to take responsibility. This is a very valuable lesson for you to learn.
You heard your daughter, Elspeth, or are you deaf?
Oliver snapped at my mother.
She needs money. We need money. We're in a bad place. We are financially destitute. We are going to be homeless. You are stinking rich. You can help us. You're a miserly little bitch, Elspeth. You know you can help us, but you still refuse to. What is wrong with you?
My mother remained calm. She said to Oliver, You heard me, Oliver. I'm not going to fix your problems for you. You forget I've also been in your position before. I've had issues with finances, and I had to make a plan. You need to do very much the same. If I were a bank manager, I'd not be throwing cash at you, and nor shall I, in the circumstances. It's a poor investment. That would be a foolish financial decision to make. The answer is no. I cannot and I will not help you out. There was a long silence for a moment, and I burst into tears, and Oliver said,
Look what you've done to your daughter. Look how upset she is. This is your fault, Elspeth, because you're as hard as nails. What kind of a mother are you?
I think I'm quite a good mother, actually, even if I say so myself. Despite my money, my children are not self-entitled, mollycoddled or spoilt. And believe me, it has been tough to say no to them. But it's been for their greatest good. But I wouldn't expect you to understand that, Oliver. I think you'll find all the problems you're having financially at the moment have a whole lot to do with some of the bad investments you've made, Oliver. And I understand you're not adverse to trying your hand at a bit of gambling. I suspect you've lost a lot of money going down that path. Now, as far as my daughter is concerned, she can stay here. No, but you? No, you can't. You're not welcome.
You're a bitch, Elspeth Oliver had snapped. Your daughter needs help, and you refuse to budge.
I told you, Oliver, I can't keep repeating myself. If the ship you are on is sinking, you need to swim. That's what you need to do. And I'm willing to throw my daughter a life vest. She can stay here as long as she likes, but you're not welcome to join her, Oliver. I'm afraid I cannot condone your treatment of my daughter. You have abused her trust and mine with all your indiscretions. And if you don't think I know about them, believe me, I know all about them.
You're a bitch, Elspeth, Oliver had snapped. Your daughter needs help, and you refuse to budge.
Oliver, I told you, my daughter can move in with me if she needs a roof over her head. I'm just not going to be throwing cash at you both. You both need to learn to face life's challenges without expecting handouts. You should have seen Oliver, said Simone, turning to me with red eyes. He was so angry, Claudia, so angry. He was like a pressure cooker that looked as if he was about to explode. I never knew he was capable of such rage. The next thing I know that Oliver gets up and he grabs the cushion on the settee and he throws my poor mother onto the floor, covering her mouth with a cushion to suffocate her. And he pushed down on her so hard. He was screaming, "You bitch!
You will pay for this.
I was terrified, begging him to stop, and I began throwing things at him, but he refused to listen to me. And it happened all so quickly. I couldn't stop him, Claudia. I really tried. And then I froze to the spot. It all just seemed so surreal. My mother fighting back, oscillating her arms and legs. And then suddenly her body, it just becomes just so limp. Oliver held the cushion down so hard to ensure she was dead. Oh, it was horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. There are no words, Claudia. I was in tears, shouting at my husband to stop. And I said, "What have you done? You've killed my mother. How could you? This is my mother." But he pushes me onto the floor so that I fall backwards next to my mother. And he screams at me,
"I'll smother you as well if you don't do what I say."
He made me wipe down the surfaces in the living room with bleach. He made me find some pills in the medicine cabinet, which I had to crush up with a pestle and mortar and put down my mother's throat. He then told me to write a suicide note, to leave it in the kitchen drawer for the cops to find. I promise you it freaked me the hell out, but I was so scared that Oliver would also turn on me. He became so manic, like a rabid dog, if you know what I mean. He told me, Claudia, that I should be grateful for what he'd done, that I should be grateful that he'd murdered my mother, because now Elspeth was dead, we would get out of our financial debts and would finally be rich when the inheritance came through for us. I promise you, Claudia, he had no remorse, absolutely no remorse for what he'd done. And I realized in that moment that my mother was right all along about Oliver. He wasn't a good person, Claudia. He never was a good person. I've not said anything because Oliver is threatening me. He says if I blab to anyone, especially to you, he will turn on me. He says he will tell the police I smothered my mother with the cushion because I was so mad that she wouldn't pay for IVF treatments. What am I going to do, Claudia? I'm in a mess. He doesn't want me to speak to you again because he's afraid I'll tell you everything." "Oh, my word. I don't know what to say," I said, sitting in the car staring out in the darkness on the road as I listened to my sister-in-law, unable to believe what she was telling me. "So you're saying Oliver killed Elspeth? Where is he now?" I asked her. "I told you. He's at home in bed," she assured me. "I slipped out when he was fast asleep. Believe me, Claudia, that man can sleep, especially after a couple of beers. I just needed to see you in person. I don't know what to do, Claudia. The police have been sniffing around us, and I don't think I can keep lying to them any longer. It's like they know we're hiding something. I feel as if I'm about to crack. And that detective, he's on to us, I'm telling you." "This is not your fault, Simone. Get that out of your head. The only thing you're guilty of is being married to a monster. I've never liked your husband, Oliver. I always got the impression he was waiting for a big payday, so that when Elspeth passed away, he'd inherit all that money. I think she sensed this from the very beginning. Your mother was a discerning woman. I believe the only reason she didn't help you with IVF treatments financially was because your husband was such a rat, frolicking around all the time with other women. I think she knew any children you might have would grow up in an unstable environment. I'm going to be honest with you, Simone, but I don't think your husband ever loved you. I think he saw you as a meal ticket that was worth holding on to. But he's been cheating on you for years and years, and you have put up with it. What were you thinking? I never understood that. Most women I know would never tolerate that. But you put up with it despite knowing about all his indiscretions. And I just want to know why, Simone. I want to try and understand." "I don't understand myself either, Claudia. I wish I did. My mother's been telling me for years that my husband is a serial cheat. And you know what? I refused to listen to her, even though I absolutely knew it was true. But I just didn't want to listen. Sometimes you can live in denial, because it's so much easier that way. I used to discover lacy knickers in his car, women's lipsticks, all kind of stuff like that indicated to me he was less than faithful. But although I knew what was going on under my nose, I turned a blind eye to it." Simone wiped away the tears from her eyes with a tissue and blew her nose into its folds. "I'm such a prize idiot, aren't I? What on earth is wrong with me? I tell you, Claudia, I don't understand myself. Why, I have absolutely no self-respect, no self-esteem. As you say, no other woman would have put up with this, but I did. What's wrong with me? He treated me with such a cavalier approach, and I put up with it all. I always felt if Oliver left me that I'd be all on my own, and that nobody would ever want me." "He didn't tell you that, did he?" I gasped. "You're a beautiful woman, Simone. Any man would be lucky to have you." "Well, he was always telling me how lucky I was to have him, and that other women would give their right arm to be with him. And I believed him, I guess." "Oh, my goodness. You didn't believe that, did you?" "I did, Simone. Maybe I have issues with self-esteem, I'm not sure. But I really did think I loved him. But not any more. Not after all this. And now he's threatening to kill me. He says if I breathe a word about what happened, that he'll do to me what he did to Elspeth. And I don't doubt he means it. He says I'm the weak link in the chain. I think he's afraid I'm going to talk." So there we are. That's the end of part 4. Part 5 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.